Holla ballers, what's going on? It's Preacher, and we finally started to see, this is the most dangerous time in a job like mine, and mainly for the community, ever in the history of World of Warcraft, right? This period of time now, between the point where Legion actually exists on our machines, is really ropey, because we're getting information that essentially the devs don't want you to have yet. They don't. They don't want people data mining everything. They know it's going to happen, but they don't particularly want it. Because people are going to read into it, and as we know, the community tends to get very fixated on things that don't necessarily exist. It's got to be hugely annoying for the guys who are creating this stuff, right? They have to be in such fear of what is possibly going to enter the public domain, even if it's not intended to be that way. So, with that in mind, what I'm not going to do is sit here and read every single talent to you. That would be fucking lunacy. We're going to have the quick looks pretty soon-ish, assuming beta's coming pretty soon-ish. Right? In which case we will be looking at the talents when they're implemented in the game. And we can see how they will work, how they will fit into our rotations in an actual practice, rather than trying to guess how that's going to happen. I also assume most of you can read, so you can go over to MMO Champion, or you can go to anywhere you want to go, where this information is around, such as the specific class blogs, and you can read that kind of stuff there, and read the individual talents. The ones I am going to discuss, I'm not going to ignore them by any means, I will put up on the screen. It's going to be a bit of a slideshow, because obviously I can't show these things in action yet, you guys are fully aware of that, and we'll be talking about them in that fashion, okay? So I'll do some photoshopping skills and bring them up into, so you can nice and easily read the ones I'm talking about there, which will be setting the example. There are a lot of talents that are homogenous across classes. They work very, very similarly, so I'll be picking ones out of interest, bringing them to you, and looking at it that way. Please note, this is the pre-beta stuff, right? This is like a build. We don't even know when this build was created. Some of this stuff actually doesn't even coincide with the class blogs, the official class blogs we got from Blizzard just last week. Some of these talents actually go against the stuff that was in there. It's entirely possible this build of beta existed before they then made the updates in the class blog. So, to say this stuff is going to change would be a ridiculous understatement, to the point of absurdity. It's going to change, so I have no doubt, I've absolutely refused to read any sort of community feedback on this yet. I've no doubt people are theory crafting and throwing numbers into spreadsheets and all kinds of crazy stuff right now, before we've even got a beta that's activatable or anything along those lines. So please, be cool about stuff. What we're here to do, this is the important thing, because you might say, well, having said that, Preacher, why are you even making a video? The point is, we need to give feedback. Okay, this is the period of time where we chip in with common sense feedback. How is this actually going to affect our gameplay? Do we like it? Do we dislike it? A huge amount of things in here are very subjective. And we know, and I know without reading community feedback, there'll be lots of people claiming they're re-rolling, you've destroyed my class. And in the same post, probably, there's somebody who's like, I love these changes. Very subjective stuff going on right now. But we give feedback. Okay, this talent feels completely useless. The other talents are far too powerful. This just doesn't make sense. There's no way this is ever going to work. And I'll talk about a few of them as we go in. That feedback is important at this stage. To say, look, I see what you were going for here, but it sucks. And here's why. Not just, it sucks, I hate game, right? And I'm uninstalling, bye-bye Blizz. Bye-bye. Yeah, be that way if you want to. But try and give reasons as to why you want to do this, okay? So, let's get into it, having said that huge caveat. And also, a big tweet there from Celestalon. Some of this stuff doesn't even exist anymore, right? It doesn't even exist anymore. This stuff has been data mined and it's already gone. So, we'll talk about the direction and the flavor and some of the ways this is looking, because that's important. They had a few difficult things to achieve with this talent system. One, and was kind of my biggest fear, is they had to put in the depth and the sort of, I called it the finesse of the specs into the talent system. I don't think it was ever going to be achievable. We saw several things removed in the class previews that there's no way that that could fit into a talent system, such as Bandit's Guile for the combat rogues, yeah? That is a huge mechanic that really gives the flavor of the top-end competitive nature of that spec amongst other combat rogues. That's where it came from. If you could correctly use what is essentially has some RNG elements to it, but if you can manipulate it, which you were able to do, then you could see some really amazing results. And that's what differentiates the players at the top end. Now, it's pretty clear that the talents aren't designed around the very, very top end of the game, because it's such a small portion of players. So it was not surprising to me. I'm a little saddened that we're not seeing that in the talent system, but it was expected. Okay, if they've removed it, they've removed it. There is no way those kind of mechanics were going to fit into the talent system. What they were aiming to do was strike a balance, one between PvE solo play Raiding, because obviously the PvP stuff has its own talent system now, so we can nicely ignore that for the most part, which is pretty cool. And also now, and there's many examples of this through the new talent trees, is the challenge mode system. This is supposed to be a huge, huge portion of the game going into Legion. It's something that they can't ignore. And you'll notice that a lot of the talents seem kind of strange for raiding. They seem kind of strange for solo play, but really nice in a sort of 5-man scenario. That's because challenge modes are going to be an integral part of the progression path for non-raiders specifically, outside of raiding, right? That's where they're going to be. Blizzard hopes you're going to be taking part in this kind of stuff and working towards progressing your character in that way. And the talent system reflects that a hell of a lot. It reflects it so much. There's some things that just seem to not make sense for an elongated battle. And that's because they're designed without an elongated battle in mind. They're designed for a couple of minutes, and that's about it. Okay, there's some talents which really indicate a huge shift in skill cap between classes, and I think the most obvious one we can look at here is the Discipline Priest. The Discipline Priest is going from one of the more simple, I'm not saying it was simple, please don't jump down my throat, there was definitely some skill to be had there, but one of the more simple to pick up and get good results specs in the game in Warlords of Draenor. Discipline, based on its new talent system, appears to be going to become one of the most complex play styles in the game. I highly doubt it's going to go live this way, for that reason. It looks to be, if you read into this, and read exactly how these targeted atonement people and the different variety of spells they're throwing in actually work, in comparison to something like a Holy Priest, which is just getting huge amounts of throughput. If you're not sure what throughput is, that's just the amount of raw HPS or healing you can throw out in a much simpler way. Discipline Priest looks dead in the water to me. I don't get why people are going to play this spec. If I'm being completely honest with you, based on how I can foresee the talents playing out and the play style that comes with it, I don't get why people are going to play this in its current form when the other healers just don't have to deal with the amount of shit that a Discipline Priest is going to have to deal with. I really don't. It's one of those specs that's so over the top in terms of how it's going to play that I don't think it'll make the run for players who want to log in and have some fun. Some guys will always play it, there's no doubt about that. I'm generalizing a little bit, but for the most part, it's one of those specs I think people will turn away from until it's dramatically changed, and I can see this being changed a hell of a lot. That being said, they aimed, and we knew this, to have the talent system work very similar to how the Feral Druids' end talents worked in Warlords of Draenor, which is that you had several choices, and they kind of increased in skill level as you went through them without benefiting too much. So if you chose the most difficult to manage talent, so let's say, and yeah, I know it's not super difficult, I get that, right? Like Blood Talons, or you could have like a passive Savage Roar sort of aspect to it. You were benefited from having Blood Talons, right? You would get more damage from doing that and managing correctly, but you also had this extra ability to manage on top of everything else. Or you could make it simpler, and perhaps as an early player or a more casual player or a more amateur player, however you want to look at it, you would get better results from not having to manage Blood Talons. For your personal playstyle, you would see higher DPS returns personally by not having this extra ability to manage and try and work into rotation while you're learning to play, and then eventually you can move up. They've tried to add that into the game quite effectively by creating choices that are either passive or activatable. You can add more skills to your skill bar, to your play bar, or you can have passives that you don't really need to worry about too much and you can react to quite simply, but have less buttons to deal with, which is a nice system. I'm okay with it. Not everybody's a top-end player. In fact, there are very, very few top-end players. So for the general play base, I think it makes a lot of sense that they can add passives in and keep activatables there. Now, the balance is going to be difficult. I think this is going to be so difficult because whether or not you know it in gaming, there's something called dominant strategy. Let's say there are ultra mega difficult super combos in a fighting game, right? In Street Fighter, ultra mega super combos. However, you can get the same results and win easier by just punching someone in the face. Due to the way it works. You're going to just punch someone in the face. Despite you have access to these mega powerful, mega complex maneuvers, they're no more effective than just punching someone in the face over and over again. That's the point. It's not that the super complex way is way more powerful. They're, in fact, both of them give the same result. And in that scenario, you have to ask, why would you use the more complex route if the simplest route gives you the exact same answer? Okay? So you could go through a mathematical equation and use differentials and all this kind of stuff. Or it's actually just 2 plus 2. And which one are you going to use in all scenarios, right? That's just the simple way it's going to be. So whether or not they're going to intend that the adding more activatables in yields better results across the board is yet to be seen. But my indication so far is they're not looking at it that way. What they're actually looking at is easy to skill-based, but the easy just prevents slight mistakes. So for this scenario, I'm actually going to look at the Blood DK's first tier. Bloodworms make a return. Okay, so Bloodworms. And Bloodworms work with your Death Strike or Breath of Syndragosa would heal you past full health. You create a Bloodworm. Okay, so if you overheal with your ability, which some would see as a mistake, Bloodworms explode if they aren't fed for 10 seconds or when you drop below 50% health, healing you for the total amount of excess healing. So when you overheal, you will generate Bloodworms, and then when you get in trouble, they will prop you up for that amount of overhealing you did. That is a nice safety net. It's a barrier. It's not going to save your life because we're talking 50% health here. Not a big danger zone for a lot of tanks. Not a big danger zone. But the fact that you are spamming Death Strike, right, which is technically the wrong thing to do in a lot of scenarios, okay? Good Blood DKs will tell you this. Just mindlessly spamming Death Strike can be a big pain in the ass. You're not overly punished for it. This is a passive that will just do its job, so you won't be hurt really badly by doing it wrong. Or you could choose Rune Tap. So Rune Tap now costs 2 runes. It consumes your 2 runes and generates 60 runic power. This makes your decision making as a good or a really advanced Blood DK, okay, a really advanced Blood DK, far more prominent, because you don't need, this is saying you don't need the benefit of this safety net from Bloodworms. In fact, you're going to turn this into an advantage by not taking Bloodworms and getting rid of your safety net and instead taking Rune Tap. And Rune Tap's going to allow you to do much better things with it. I like that approach. This is so much better. So much better is saying you have a safety net, so if you fuck it up, that's alright. But you also have the choice of something a little bit more complex, an extra activatable button, but use it correctly should provide better results. And you can use it on demand or whenever you want. Another example, if we look at the Hunter, okay, if we go to the Hunter and we go to Marks and we look at their level 100 talents, we get Dark Ranger. Your ranged attacks and attacks which deal damage over time now have a chance to summon a dark minion. The dark minion will attack your target. So just passively, you will generate a dark minion that will go and do damage for you. That's it. You don't have to worry about it. Or you can pick Kill Flip. Kill Flip, for 8 seconds after disengage, you deal 50% more damage. Something to manage, something to think about position-wise, because the amount of people I see disengage out of range of the boss just makes me go, ugh. But if you're a good marksman hunter and you're planning around your position, doing all that kind of stuff, and you're tracking this kind of stuff, you will get more benefit, hopefully, from Kill Flip with having to manage all that stuff than you will from Dark Ranger. The issue comes in, as I said earlier, if Dark Ranger just flat out does more damage. Okay? If Dark Ranger just does flat out more damage, you're not going to take Kill Flip. You're not going to start jumping around the arena or jumping around the battle, right? You're not going to jump around the raid boss for any particular reason if Dark Ranger just does flat out more damage. The only difference will be is when you want that 50% more damage on a specific period of the fight. So you're about to fight the most dangerous aspect of this fight, then you Kill Flip into it, makes more sense from a... it might not give you the best overall DPS, but would be certainly better for a raid scenario. Okay, so I like the idea. I hope it balances correctly so that one just isn't flat out way better, and that one is the passive one. If I'm in all honesty, passives should never be better than something that you're controlling and activating. That's my personal opinion. Passives should never be better than that, because it's less interesting, less to do, less to think about, but at the same time, it's got to be balanced correctly so you don't just add another fucking 6 or 7 buttons to your bar and you're trying to manage them all the time. Plus, big hype for volley being back. I hope people are excited about that. I can't wait to check. The other difficulty they're running into is talents traditionally are single target AoE and sustained AoE. I'm glad they're moving away from that. Single target, AoE, sustained AoE. Right, that was generally what we got. We usually got one big single target spell, then a bursty AoE spell, and then one that went on all the way. They're keeping some of that in. Okay, we're keeping a little some of that in, but they're trying to move away from it in some fashion, so I'm hoping that they don't reverse that and just go to this rather mundane, so every talent sort of fits into that model. Okay, some of these rows are very confusing to me. Now, we have had confirmed by the data miners that the rows that the talents are in are correct, which means some of these talents really confuse me as to their positioning. If we take a look at Liam's Warrior, for instance, what we have in here in the level 15 tier is 2 spells that have an element of CC and then one straight DPS one. which for me never should fit in. There should be different types of CC, either a reasonable damage, low duration CC, or one that's a pure CC and low damage. What we shouldn't have in there is an option that one is just pure DPS, especially when both of them can affect AoE. So we have Shockwave, okay? So we have Shockwave, which still does its Shockwave type stuff and does damage. We have Stormbolt in there, which is kind of okay. It's a straight single target, so if you're not doing AoE of any form, Stormbolt will be the default. But then they throw Sweeping Strikes in there, which in a lot of scenarios, because we very, very rarely anymore fight one big giant boss. That very rarely happens these days. Very, very few bosses are like that. I can name like 3 in Warlords of Draenor where it was just the boss. The likelihood is you're going to want Sweeping Strikes in all forms, which makes you wonder why put any elements of CC in the same tier instead, and while having this straight up DPS increase. Now, Shockwave is going to be good, but everybody else has so many access to AoE spells, one has to wonder why you've put this in. And then the answer kind of comes to me, it's because of challenge modes. The likelihood is in a raid scenario, sure, you'll have people who can do stuns, so you could just take Sweeping Strikes. However, in the challenge mode scenario, you're probably not going to have some people who can do AoE stuns. And having a Shockwave on demand on a 40-second cooldown is going to be a pretty big deal as you move up the tiers of challenge modes. And this is where I'm starting to see the conflict in the talents here, because they're trying to meet both these aspects of gameplay. By doing that, there is definitely some strange conflicts going on. Another one that can be looked at is the combination of defensive abilities in the warrior and mobility. If we look at the level 60 tier, Second Wind, which is still pretty garbage, you gain 6 health every 1 second if you haven't taken damage in the last 5 seconds. I don't know what the fuck that's about. Imposing Roar, Command and Shout also increases Leech. Very, very nice in a challenge mode scenario. But then they stuck in double time in there, which gives you double charge, which is super important in a lot of ways for warriors. Having double charge is a very, very important tool. If you've ever used double time, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, trust me, it's very, very important. So we have this mobility, one mobility spell thrown in amongst 2 survivability spells. These don't fit the theme of this tier at all. They're super confusing. Super confusing as to why would I have to choose between double time, which is mobility, or a defensive ability? I don't understand. You could say that charge is a defensive ability, but it's unlikely. You charge an enemy. We have intervene for going to friendlies and getting out of people, getting away from people. So these talents particularly, and this is what I'm doing here, just to be absolutely clear, is there are examples of this throughout most of the talent trees. I'm giving you some examples here and varying up the classes for interest, because I know some people will want me to mention most of the classes. I'm giving you examples, but this is prevalent throughout all of the talent systems. These are just various rows that conflict in nature, which is very, very bizarre. It's very bizarre, and I hope this kind of thing gets changed away. It's the first thing that stuck out to me that was really bizarre. The next ones that are really confusing to me, and don't worry, I will get to the good stuff, is a mixture of throughput talents. So I talked about throughput earlier. So if we take a look over towards Resto Druid, for example, and look at their level 90 tier, we got 2 talents which have kind of interesting, okay kind of stuff, but not really. So we had like Profusion. It's when your Rejuve, when you have Rejuve active on 3 or more targets, the cast time of your Healing Touch spell is reduced by 30%. Okay. Prosperity, reduce the cooldown of Swiftmen by 5 seconds. It now has 2 charges. Alright. But then it's stuck in next to Inner Peace. Reduces the cooldown of Tranquility by 1 minute. Holy fuck. Holy fuck. Now, it will depend on the length of the fight, obviously. Is this even worthwhile? And, of course, the nature of the fight will come into there. But is there any fight on record that couldn't benefit from having 2 Tranquilities or an extra Tranquility thrown in there? Not that I can think of, right? Not that I can think of at the top of my head. And plus, that is so blatantly powerful. So blatantly powerful in both challenge modes and raids that this is almost to the point of absurdity in comparison to the rather lackluster nature of Profusion and Prosperity. Prosperity's not too bad. 2 Swiftmen, that's pretty cool. But having a 1 minute less cooldown on Tranquility? That could come in. There have been many times I popped to Tranquility and not too long after wishing I had Tranquility back, and it's been on another minute or so cooldown. And many Resto Druids will probably recognize that. That's the kind of stuff that, again, is conflicting to me in nature. And as these rows seem pretty set in stone, it's worth talking about from a feedback point of view that you can't really have this side by side. I don't think, and maybe some Resto Druids will point out some faults there in my thinking, but 1 minute reduction on Tranquility seems so powerful in comparison to the other two, because it just rescues a raid. That's the difference. 2 Swiftmen's, unlikely to rescue a raid. Profusion, very unlikely with a reduced cast time and healing touch to rescue a raid. More Tranquilities, that'll save a lot of wipes. Extra Tranquilities will save a lot of wipes, and being able to use that more actively than we already do due to its mana regen nature, that is pretty crazy as well. Real crazy. So let's move on to some good stuff. What I want to point out for those of you who are paying a lot of attention to the talent system right now is that you must pay attention to the spell books. If you're using the MMO champion one, which heads over to WoWDB, please check out your spell books, because that's important. A lot of people are going to be basing the talent assessments in a world of Warlords of Draenor. That is incorrect. Lots and lots of things have changed in Legion to where this will make more sense. If you don't check the spell books out, you're going to miss out on, one, Divine Steed exists, which we talked about. It's for the prop paladin. It's actually a spell you're going to get where you summon your mount indoors as a charge, essentially. You can ride it for 4 seconds with 100% movement speed. Can use it indoors. You can even talent it at 100 to reduce the cooldown by 50% and reduces all damage taken while you're on your steed by 20%. Awesome. Awesome. I can't wait to see the prop paladins riding around on their mounts. So please note that it's there. Also notice things like Crash Lightning. If we get more technical into the playstyle, Crash Lightning for the enhancement is not listed on the talent side, but you are getting Crash Lightning, which is giving you the big ability to AoE constantly with your Storm Strike and Lava Lash. Okay, these are things that are in the actual spell books, not in the talent trees. So please bear those in mind. The last one I think is super important as well is actually the Disc Priests are getting Power Word Radiance. Right? Power Word Radiance, which actually makes a lot more sense in the world of the talent system if you know that Power Word Radiance exists, which is a burst of light that heals a friendly target and their 5 nearest allies, okay, and applies atonement for 50% its normal duration. So as you go forward and you're reading these guys, please check out your spell books on the side and note that there are extra spells being given to you baseline, which then leads us to the idea of the talent system, which a lot of people I've no doubt are disappointed with, and I'm disappointed with as well, is that some of our baseline stuff in Warlords of Draenor has been stripped away and added back in via the talent system, which means we're not actually gaining more. I can only imagine that this is an effort to reduce spell bloat. Yeah, something they did the huge culling for in Warlords of Draenor is they don't want to add in so many new spells that they're just overburdened with spells again. So Ascendance, for example, is being stripped away baseline from Shaman, but every single one of the Shaman specs can choose Ascendance as their level 100 talent. So that level 100 talent is really underwhelming right now because you already have that. And now it's a level 100 talent. The same with Killing Spree for the Outlaw Rogues, okay? Killing Spree was a baseline of combat for so long, and now it's gone, but being added back in. So that extra key binding will disappear until you just reapply it if you should choose that talent or one of the others as well, or you can choose the passive. So I assume it's just a move to reduce spell bloat. Yeah, I get it, but it's also very underwhelming. It's one of those things that we won't care about like a month into Legion. But right now, it's like you're not actually getting new stuff in a lot of cases. In several cases, I should say. Not a lot. In several cases. Because they might be taking it off you, but they're re-adding it in as a talent, where previously that would have just been an extra talent. That's not the way it's going to be. So let's look at some of the good stuff then. I'm loving the synergy on some stuff. Okay, I'm loving the synergy. So let's talk about some of the funnest abilities out there. And how could we do this without looking, and I'm sure many people are aware of it, is the Shadow Priest level 100 talent, Surrender to Madness. This is so good. Surrender to the old gods, sacrificing your soul for ultimate power. All your insanity generating abilities generate 300% more insanity until you exit Void Form, and then you die. Then you die. Requires Void Form, so you can't use Void Lord with it, I assume. What a curious talent. Risk reward. I imagine a lot of people are thinking this is something you'll try and maintain 100% of the time. I don't think so. I think if you've gone down the idea is that maybe you activate this earlier in the fight and your goal is to try and keep it up. Kind of like, it reminded me very much of Cho'Gall. If you ever did Cho'Gall Heroic, I don't think Mythic existed back then. My memory plagues me. You could turn the mages into what was supposed to be, a bad idea by making them go completely insane, but they got instant cast Pyroblasts. So it was worth doing that because the mages were tricked out enough to survive for a very, very long time, if not till the end of the fight, by hurling constant pyroblasts and just doing ludicrous damage over the whole course of the fight. A great risk-reward mechanic. I don't see it as something you want to keep in. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Surrender to Madness should be baseline for Shadow Priests. This could be one of the best ideas for clinch saves in the history of the game. When you know you have to kill this thing, the last boss, whatever it is, and you can call as a raid leader, you have this option, or in a challenge mode, or whatever it might be, which is what most of these things are based around. You can call on your Shadow Priest to sacrifice himself to make sure we get the kill. And I hope it comes with, and that's how I would look at this. Rather than something that you're trying to maintain for as long as possible, or maybe just during the execute phase where you can time it so you will die as the boss dies, or whatever it might be, as something that in an emergency, somebody died, we need our DPS here. Shadow Priests, surrender to madness. And they give it the old power overwhelming. And they turn into the fucking crazed beast. Hopefully it has a new animation. And they go absolutely hamburgers and make up for the loss of people, but then they die and can be brought back. And you can rescue various moments by doing that. That's why I'd love to see it baseline, in fact, especially as a 10-minute cooldown. You could throw it in, so it's either a bit of fun towards the end of the fight, or it's something you can call on an emergency, and it mixes multiple roles there. You have to ask yourself, is it worth sacrificing this player in order to make this happen? If you're about to get your time on that challenge mode and your fucking keystone's about to be destroyed and all that kind of stuff, you can call upon your Shadow Priest to sacrifice himself to get through this part of the fight. I like things like that. It also adds into the balance that not everybody needs to be alive all the time. And if one death dies, it's a wipe, all that kind of stuff. I think that'd be quite cool. But looking at Surrender to Madness as well, you can actually, and this is a good theme throughout all the talents, is synergize really well throughout the talent tree around your talents. Not every tree has this. Some of them have some disappointing ones for sure, but you can actually synergize really well. So if we look at Surrender to Madness and we say, okay, well, our insanity generating abilities generate 300% more insanity, and I need to stay in void form, where it's going to tick pretty heavily. I think someone's worked out it's around, you'll lose 50 insanity a second or something like that, and you have 100, is that you can then synergize around elongating that period of time as long as possible. So you can take things like Shadow Word Void, okay? With 300%, that's going to generate like 90 insanity. So fucking good. And then you can go down into things like Reaper of Souls. Your Shadow of Death is now castable on targets below 35% health and always generates insanity even if it did not kill the target. So you then have this element in the execute phase, which should help Surrender to Madness. You then have Shadowy Insight, where your Shadow of Pain, which will be ticking, 10% chance to reset the cooldown Mind Blast, extra Mind Blast, more insanity. So good. And you can then even prop it up with Oblivion. Yeah, which is a 2-minute cooldown, which lets the power of the void flow through you, instantly generating 100 insanity. So as it weans down, or you got bad procs, or whatever it might be, you can then pop Oblivion and go straight back to 100 and keep going through Surrender to Madness. You can synergize around having that. At the same time, you could go a different way, okay, and using Legacy of the Avoid with Auspicious Spirits and so on and so forth, or Sunlane, whatever it might be, to buff your dot damage if that's the way you're going to be playing it. So you can actually synergize very well. I found most of the talent trees so far you can synergize really nicely with. So what are my worst talents so far? Probably an interesting question for many of you. I think the epitome, there's a lot of mundane talents across the whole board which just aren't interesting. I think the epitome for me was probably the Demonology level 100 tier. If we look at that, something that was really boring. I was really sad to see Demonic Servitude kind of stuck around. I was just really hoping they would put the emphasis back on Doomguard, instead of then including another 100 talent, which was Summon the Inquisitor, which is basically a different type of Doomguard, more than anything. That you just, because we've got Demonic Servitude in, right, we have a different way of doing it, which is Summon Inquisitor. It doesn't replace your Doomguard, actually, from what I can tell in the tooltip. But it summons a Demonic Inquisitor, which is cool. No issue with that. That will launch Shadowfrost volleys at targets that you have doomed. So you do have Doom, still exists. It's a 20-second duration. So you doom everything and summon the Inquisitor to go for mad AoE, but it's still basically like what we already had. There's 2 talents at least in the level 100 tree of Demonology, which are just flat out fucking boring, in my opinion. Flat out boring. And then the third one is Demon Bolt. Which is just replaces Shadow Bolt, and it'll do it'll vary its damage depending on how many demons you have out. Yay. Who fucking cares? These are really boring. Like, some of the talents all the way through are just really boring. There's no doubt about that. They're super boring. They're not interesting. And it's almost because they had to play it safe. And the Demonology level 100 tree is just the epitome of that for me. It's Demonic Servitude, boring, fucking snoring. Demon Bolt, boring as fuck. And Summon Inquisitor, which is just going back to something we had 2 expansions ago, which was already in the game and didn't need to be repeated. Please fuck off, Demonic Servitude. There's got to be something more fun than that. Make our Doomguard matter again. I really like that. The fun ones, though, are, of course, Surrender to Madness. Surrender to Madness is one of the most exciting things, and it has huge possibilities. I can think of endless possibilities to use Surrender to Madness for, and either elongating it or whatever it might be. I think that is absolutely fantastic. But also, Aegis of Light. I don't know how many people saw this. In the Protection Tree, level 100 talent, the Aegis of Light. It raises an Aegis of Light, reducing all damage taken by 20% for you. Okay. And all allies standing within 10 yards behind you. Get behind the Paladin! Shields up, bitch! Exactly. We called this on a fucking web show, man. This is what we wanted the tank ring to do, the legendary tank ring, because we knew it was going to be pretty boring. And they go ahead and throw in Aegis of Light as a talent. Oh, so good. I wish it was a little bit further. 10 yards is very close, very butt sex. What I'd like to do is just ease that son of a bitch up, even 20 yards. But the fact that you all have to stand behind the Paladin as he protects you, I hope it has a kick-ass animation, as all Paladin stuff tends to do. But my god, that looks fucking fun. It looks so fun. It's just one of those things that's, in fact, all the prop Paladin stuff looks really cool. It's including, if I was going to be honest, and if I want to finish on a bit of a whimsical note on my initial impressions of the talents, Aegis of Light sounds fantastic. Knight Templar, where you get on your mount and you take less damage while you're on your mount, because it just means at some point you're not going to move with this, right? You're going to get on your mount and use it as a 20% damage reduction, aren't you? You're just going to stand there like lancing the boss. That's very cool. Final Stand. I wish they would add one thing to this. If you're not sure what Final Stand is, reduce the cooldown of Divine Shield by 50%. And when you use Divine Shield, you also taunt all targets within 15 yards for 8 seconds. I wish it would do more damage reduction so you could do this. You cannot move while Final Stand is casting. I would reduce its time to like 6 seconds, but you kneel on the floor and start fucking channeling light and praying your shield and all that kind of stuff. Just very, very fun stuff that's gone in there. There's huge amounts I could talk about. The Return of Seal of Light, all this kind of stuff, the all new hands. I can go through every single class and talk about them, but it's the wrong place to do that. We'll do that in the quick looks. That's my initial thoughts on it. Very, very difficult to balance this, and for the main part, we need to get into the gameplay and see how this plays through. Alright guys, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.